The chandeliers
I'd
of the
like to
San
extend my
Francisco Tech
sincere
Summit Ballroom
gratitude to
bathed
all of our
everything in a golden
partners,
glow,
sponsors, and
a stage
attendees for
dressed for
making this
billion-dollar
event
theater.
possible.
Hundreds of
I'd
executives,
like to extend my sincere
investors, and
gratitude to all of
journalists
our
filled the
partners,
marble-floored
sponsors, and
space,
attendees
their
for making this event
conversations buzzing
possible.
with anticipation. In less than an hour, the future of two companies and possibly the tech industry itself would be unveiled. Camille Johnson adjusted the cuff of her navy jacket and walked with a stride that announced confidence, not arrogance. She carried with her more than a decade of work, the patents that made Quantum Horizons the fastest-growing company in medical technology, the breakthroughs that promised new treatments for incurable diseases, and the unshakable calm of someone who had survived courtroom battles against Wall Street's most ruthless fraudsters. Her name on the guest list wasn't charity, it was inevitability. From across the lounge, Jeffrey Whitmore watched her with narrowed eyes. His empire, Whitmore Technologies, had been built on enterprise software, but its growth had stalled. The merger was supposed to crown him once more as a visionary. Yet when he looked at Camille, he didn't see an equal. He saw a challenge to his throne, and the thought curdled inside him. Who let the help into the executive section? He muttered, loudly enough for his CFO and a cluster of allies to hear. Their laughter was thin, nervous, as though they all sensed the line had been crossed, but none dared contradict him. Camille's head turned slightly at the sound. Her expression did not shift, but she noted it, filed it away like an attorney adding evidence to a case. Her phone buzzed. A message from her chief legal officer appeared on the screen. Still want to proceed? Her reply was short. Let's see how far he goes. When the moderator began introducing the keynote guests, Camille was named first. Before she could rise, Whitmore leaned into the microphone. And joining us from Quantum Horizons' HR department, the moderator froze, corrected himself quickly. Camille Johnson is the CEO. A wave of discomfort rippled through the audience. Whitmore only shrugged, lips curved into a smirk. Easy mistake. Camille felt the sting, but she had practiced for years how to let humiliation pass across her skin without leaving a mark. She knew this moment was not the fight. This was the setup. Later, as the crowd dispersed for lunch, she sat alone at a table with her tablet, marking sections of the contract. Her eyes lingered on a single clause buried deep in the merger agreement, Section 12.4. Conduct unbecoming of leadership. She circled it, her lips tightening almost imperceptibly. At a nearby table, Whitmore's voice carried across the clatter of silverware. This merger is just theater. Once it's complete, we'll put someone qualified in charge. He wanted her to hear it. He wanted witnesses. He wanted dominance. Camille didn't so much as glance at him. She tapped the highlighted clause again and murmured to herself, qualified enough for $2 billion in damages. When it was time for her presentation, the lights dimmed and a hush fell. She spoke with measured clarity about the neural interface Quantum Horizons had developed, technology capable of mapping disease progression at a cellular level. Reporters leaned forward, the glow of screens reflecting in their eyes. Then, like clockwork, Whitmore cut across her. What Camille means is, his interruptions came again and again, heavy with condescension, until the journalists themselves began exchanging glances. They could see what was happening. They were recording every second. Camille finished her talk without breaking pace, her voice steady, her dignity intact. And when she stepped off the stage, the cluster of audience members who wanted to shake hands, to ask questions, to praise the work they gathered around her, not him, Whitmore noticed. The vein at his temple pulsed, but he swallowed his frustration and smiled for the cameras. By evening, the ballroom had transformed into a glittering reception, champagne flutes raised under the chandeliers. The air smelled of ambition and expensive perfume. Camille moved through the crowd with deliberate calm, every step choreographed as though she had rehearsed it. Whitmore intercepted her, flanked by his board members, his smile thin and his tone rehearsed. We've revised the announcement. You'll have 2 minutes instead of 5. The technical specifics need proper explanation, Camille said, her gaze steady. Technical details bore these people. He waved a hand. Efficiency matters more. She answered without raising her voice. The technical details are why this merger is valuable. He leaned closer, ensuring others could hear. Let's be honest. Your valuation is inflated. We're doing you a favor. His laugh rang too loudly. Rehearsed bravado. Then he placed his hand on her shoulder as if to stake a claim. She brushed it away. Don't touch me, Jeffrey. The smile faltered, then sharpened. Touchy, he said with a sneer. Is that how you convinced your board to appoint you? Playing the harassment card? The silence around them thickened. No one at his side intervened. They simply looked away, complicit in their cowardice. Camille's phone buzzed again. Another message. Found what you suspected. Call when ready. She tucked the phone back into her pocket, eyes on Whitmore, her face the portrait of composure. The lights dimmed once more as the merger announcement ceremony began. Reporters crowded the ballroom, fingers hovering above keyboards, waiting to break the story first. Whitmore took the podium, his suit gleaming under the spotlight. Today marks a historic moment for our industry, he proclaimed. His slides drowned Quantum Horizons' logo under Whitmore Technologies' banner, a subtle erasure. Cameras flashed. When Camille approached to present her portion, Whitmore's elbow knocked over a glass of water. It spilled across her notes in an expanding stain. Oops, he said, smiling for the photographers. Guess you'll have to wing it. She left the soggy papers where they lay and stepped to the microphone. Quantum Horizons' quantum architecture enables breakthroughs once considered impossible. We've mapped treatment pathways for diseases medicine has failed to cure for centuries. The crowd leaned forward, engaged. Then, as if on cue, Whitmore interrupted. What Camille means is, his voice cut across hers, full of derision. And then, with a mocking laugh, he placed a hand at her arm and physically moved her aside, standing in front of the microphone. The quantum states function like traditional binary systems, he announced confidently, revealing his ignorance. A reporter raised a hand. Ms. Johnson, would you care to respond? Camille inhaled to speak, but Whitmore cut her off again. We've taken enough of her time. She has diversity panels to attend. I'm sure. Gasps rippled through the room. Cameras caught everything, the shove, the words, the smirk. Camille did not argue. She stood, calm as stone, letting the silence wrap around the humiliation until it suffocated him more than it did her. She glanced at her watch, tapped her phone once, and stepped away from the podium. By the time Whitmore descended from the stage, basking in applause he hadn't earned, Camille was waiting in the wings. Her voice, when she spoke, was soft enough that only he could hear, yet sharp enough to pierce his arrogance. The merger is canceled. His smile froze. For the first time all day, Jeffrey Whitmore understood he was no longer in control. Jeffrey Whitmore's laughter had not yet died in his throat when the words landed like a blade. The merger is canceled. He stared at Camille Johnson as if she had spoken in a foreign language. Canceled? Impossible. His board had already toasted to victory. The press had prepared headlines, and investors were circling like hawks waiting to feast. Yet her calm tone left no room for negotiation. She said it as though it were fact, not decision. His instinct was to roar, to remind her that billions were on the line. But something in her gaze stopped him. The cameras still circled the stage. Journalists whispered. Investors clutched their phones, eyes wide. He forced his lips back into a smirk, though the muscles twitched. You'll regret this, Camille, he whispered, before striding away with a show of false confidence. Behind him, she reached for her phone again. A single phrase sent to her legal officer. Clause 12.4 invoked. File immediately. Within minutes, encrypted documents moved across secure networks, digital signatures confirmed, and the foundations of Whitmore's empire began to crack. Camille left the ballroom and entered the private conference suite her team had converted into a war room. Frosted glass sealed them from outside eyes. Her chief legal officer sat at the head of the table, posture rigid, a folder of contracts laid open before him. Beside him, the communications director adjusted her glasses, visibly anxious. On the far wall, a third figure appeared on the secure video link, face shadowed deliberately, voice disguised. "It's done," Camille said simply. She slid her phone across the table. "Every humiliation today, every word he spat, it's all documented." The shadowed figure spoke first, voice metallic. "The financial irregularities you suspected are confirmed. Whitmore's Series E valuation is rotten. His books won't withstand scrutiny. The SEC will have grounds within the week." Camille nodded. "Then we move ahead. Release the evidence, but no fingerprints leading back to us. This isn't about revenge. It's about consequences." Her communications director shifted uncomfortably. "If we terminate the merger now, our stock could take a hit. Investors hate instability." "This isn't about the stock price," Camille replied, her tone low, steady. She straightened the pen that lay slightly crooked on the table, her hand precise. "It's about the future of this industry. Whitmore represents everything toxic in it. Someone has to take a stand." Meanwhile, across the hall, Jeffrey basked in hollow applause, surrounded by his inner circle. He raised his champagne flute, the golden liquid trembling slightly in the crystal. "Once we absorb their patents, we'll restructure the entire division," he boasted, voice booming. "Camille Johnson will be gone within 6 months. His general counsel appeared at his side, pale-faced, a document clutched in trembling hands. "Sir, there's something we need to discuss. Section 12.4 of the agreement." "Later," Jeffrey waved him off, forcing laughter. "We're celebrating." But the lawyer insisted, "It's not boilerplate. Jeffrey, it's explicit. Either party may unilaterally terminate if discriminatory conduct is proven, with damages set at 30% of the merger value." Jeffrey froze, his glass halfway to his lips. 30%. Over $2 billion. He scoffed aloud, but the lawyer pressed on. "And Camille's team has been recording every interaction today. Every word, every gesture." His stomach lurched, but he forced another laugh for the crowd. "Meaningless," he muttered. "A technicality." Yet the chill crawling across his spine told him otherwise. Back in the war room, Camille pulled up a timeline of the day's events on the wall screen. His insults in the lounge, his interruptions on stage, the deliberate spill of water, the sneer about diversity panels. Dozens of angles, captured by phone, camera, and smartwatch. Each timestamp aligned with witness testimony already prepared. "This isn't his first offense," she said quietly. "It's just the first time anyone has built the case properly." Her eyes flicked to her legal officer. "Former employees?" "Several are willing to come forward. Their NDAs can be pierced under whistleblower protections. We'll have affidavits within 48 hours. "Good," she said. "By then, the market will already have shifted." Her phone rang. The caller ID glowed with the name of Whitmore's board chair. She answered, her voice even. "Camille." The man's tone was forced joviality. "Jeffrey assures me this has all been a misunderstanding. Perhaps we could discuss this privately, away from cameras." "There's nothing to discuss," she replied. "The termination paperwork has already been filed." She ended the call without waiting for response. The room fell silent, heavy with the knowledge of what they had just set in motion. Across town, in a sleek black car speeding through the city, Jeffrey's phone erupted with notifications. The stock market had closed, but after-hours trading was unforgiving. Sterling Innovation's ticker flashed red, down 8% in a single hour. Analysts were whispering, investors calling, the air of invincibility evaporating. He stormed into Camille's temporary office, uninvited, his tie askew, face flushed. You can't terminate this merger, he spat, slamming his palm against her desk. Your board approved it. It's binding. Camille remained seated, her hands folded neatly. The contrast between his rage and her composure could not have been starker. Read the agreement you signed. Jeffrey, Section 12.4 grants me unilateral authority under these circumstances. This is absurd. You're throwing away billions over hurt feelings. His voice dropped to a growl. I'll destroy you in the press. Try, she said evenly. Every major outlet already has footage of your behavior. By morning, it won't be my reputation in question. His phone buzzed again. He pulled it from his pocket. His face drained of color as he read the alerts. Whitmore Technologies stock plummets. Quantum Horizons steady. This is market manipulation, he shouted, grasping at straws. No, Camille said, closing her laptop with finality. It's the market responding to leadership failure. For a long moment, the only sound was his ragged breathing. Then he turned sharply on his heel and stormed out, barking orders into his phone, summoning his PR team, demanding they paint Camille as unstable, unfit, emotional. His world was burning, but he still believed he could bluff his way through the smoke. Camille watched him go, her reflection calm in the frosted glass. She did not smile. This wasn't victory. Not yet. This was the beginning of the unraveling. Outside, the night air of San Francisco vibrated with sirens and distant foghorns. In the ballroom, the champagne still flowed, but the laughter had turned brittle. Executives checked their phones, whispering about stock prices and SEC whispers. Journalists typed furiously. Stories already drafted. Merger collapse. Allegations of discrimination. SEC inquiry. Pending. Camille stood alone at the window. The city lights reflected like constellations in her eyes. She whispered, almost to herself, You thought I came here to merge, Jeffrey, but I came here to end you. The night after the tech summit was not supposed to end this way. Jeffrey Whitmore sat in the back of his chauffeured car, his phone vibrating every 30 seconds with new alerts. The glow of the screen painted his face in shades of panic. Stock down 8%. Analysts downgrade. SEC inquiry rumored. His jaw clenched tighter with each headline. From the windows of his limousine, San Francisco glittered with indifference. The city did not care that its so-called king was bleeding out in real time. At headquarters, the celebration had evaporated. Executives who only hours earlier toasted his brilliance now whispered in corners, their laughter hollow. The champagne still stood half-poured, glasses sweating on mahogany tables, but no one touched them. The PR director sat pale-faced in a side office, typing frantic drafts of statements that sounded weak even before she hit save. Jeffrey stormed into the boardroom unannounced, his tie loose, the air around him sharp with rage. This is a temporary PR problem, he barked, slamming his palm against the polished wood. Camille Johnson overreacted, and the market is responding emotionally. By next week, this will blow over. The board members sat in uneasy silence. Some avoided his eyes altogether, staring down at their notes. Finally, one of the older directors leaned forward, silver hair gleaming under the recessed lights. The SEC inquiry isn't irrational, Jeffrey, he said quietly. Neither is the $2.3 billion penalty clause you triggered. Jeffrey scoffed, pounding the table hard enough to make the glasses jump. No court will enforce that ridiculous clause. It's boilerplate. We stand firm. The chairwoman of the board slid a thick brief across the table. Our outside counsel disagrees. They've reviewed the videos. They've reviewed the transcripts. This isn't boilerplate. This is breach. The room's temperature dropped. For a moment, Jeffrey tried to meet their eyes, daring them to defy him, but no one looked back. He could feel the ground shifting under his feet. Meanwhile, in a high-rise across the city, Camille Johnson's office hummed with a different energy. Her team worked with quiet efficiency, screens filled with scrolling data, timelines, sworn statements, Former employees of Whitmore Technologies were coming forward in waves, breaking NDAs under whistleblower protections. Each account painted the same portrait, a culture of arrogance, harassment, and fear. Every new file added another brick to the case she was building. She listened in silence as her legal officer summarized the mounting evidence. 3 former vice presidents, 5 engineers, and an executive assistant, all willing to testify. The documentation of discriminatory behavior spans 15 years. Camille nodded, her face unreadable. Forward everything to the SEC. No commentary, no fingerprints back to us. The facts will speak louder than any narrative he tries to spin. Back at Whitmore headquarters, the CFO paced nervously. The SEC is the real problem, he confessed to Jeffrey behind closed doors. If they dig into the Series E valuation discrepancies, no one can prove anything, Jeffrey snapped, cutting him off. Our lawyers will bury them in paperwork. He straightened his cufflinks, trying to reclaim his old swagger. Focus on discrediting Johnson. Paint her as impulsive, emotional. Make the street question her stability. But even as he spoke, the first wave of whistleblower leaks hit the press. Business blogs published anonymous testimonies. Journalists released clips from the tech summit, his hand swatting hers away, his voice dripping with disdain, his laughter as he pushed her from the podium. The footage spread like wildfire across social media. Within hours, hashtags trended worldwide. The internet had already rendered its verdict. When Jeffrey arrived home that night, his penthouse no longer felt invincible. The floor-to-ceiling windows looked out on the city lights, but he saw only shadows of doubt. His phone buzzed again, this time a private message from one of his largest shareholders. We need to talk. The words carried no warmth. The next morning, the board convened an emergency session. Jeffrey entered the mahogany-lined room rehearsing his arguments. Continuity, market stability, irreplaceable vision. But before he could speak, screens around the room lit up with breaking news. Quantum Horizons announces partnership with Whitmore's 3 largest competitors. The headline landed like a hammer. Camille had struck again, slicing away his leverage before he could even open his mouth. The room dissolved into chaos. Directors shouted over one another. The board chair rapped the table until silence fell. This company cannot survive with you as CEO. Jeffrey, the vote is immediate. He pounded his fist. You can't seriously consider removing me. I built this empire from nothing. And now you've put it at existential risk, the chairwoman said coldly. She slid a document across the table. 8-1, effective immediately. You are removed. For a heartbeat, Jeffrey simply stared. His hands trembled as he rose, rage simmering just beneath his skin. This is outrageous, he shouted. You can't do this. It's done, the chair replied. She nodded to security. The walk through his own headquarters felt longer than any in his life. Employees turned away, avoiding eye contact. The badge clipped to his jacket buzzed and went dead before he reached the elevator. By the time he hit the parking garage, his company credit cards were already canceled. Camille heard the news in silence. No cheer rose from her lips. No smile crossed her face. She only adjusted the pen on her desk so it lay perfectly parallel to the edge, then turned back to her team. This isn't over. He'll fight outside the company now. Prepare for the next phase. And outside, the world was already watching. Financial channels ran split-screen images. Camille calm, deliberate, composed. Jeffrey red-faced, shouting, his empire in flames. Analysts called it a market-driven reckoning. Commentators used new words with casual certainty. To get Whitmored, a career implosion born of arrogance and abuse. The empire was cracking, and for the first time, Jeffrey Whitmore began to understand that no amount of money, no army of lawyers, no carefully cultivated myth could glue it back together again. The storm that had begun with a single canceled merger had grown into a tidal wave sweeping across the technology sector. For weeks, Jeffrey Whitmore's downfall dominated the headlines, Clips of his arrogance replayed endlessly, analysts calculating billions in losses, former employees stepping into the light with trembling voices but steady resolve. His name had become shorthand for toxic leadership, whispered in boardrooms and dissected in business schools. But the world soon discovered that for Camille Johnson, dismantling one man's empire had never been the final destination. It was merely the opening act. 3 mornings after the board at Whitmore Technologies voted to remove him, Camille stood before the glass facade of Quantum Horizons headquarters, the sunrise catching on the steel beams that reached skyward. The building itself was young compared to the old towers downtown, but it carried the spirit of the future. Wide, open spaces, teams collaborating across disciplines, a culture built not on hierarchy, but on shared purpose. She walked through the lobby with measured steps, her heels tapping softly against the stone floor, and was greeted by rows of employees who looked up from their screens with a new kind of pride. They had endured mockery from competitors, whispers that their CEO was untested, undeserving. Now they saw in her a proof point carved into history. Calm had triumphed over cruelty, dignity over derision. In the top-floor conference room, her board waited. Screens along the walls glowed with data, market charts, legal updates, projections. The mood was tense but steady, as though they were aware that a new chapter had begun and the weight of shaping it rested in their hands. Camille did not open with pleasantries. "This industry is at an inflection point," she began, her voice clear, unhurried. "We've shown what happens when arrogance is unchecked. But unless we build something lasting, his fall will be remembered as spectacle, not lesson." "I won't allow that." She turned to the legal officer. "The penalty from Whitmore's termination?" He nodded. $2.3 billion, already secured in escrow. Murmurs ran through the room. The number still startled even those who had followed every step. "That money is not victory," Camille continued. "It's leverage, and we will use it to set a standard this industry can no longer ignore." Her communications director leaned forward. "What kind of standard?" Camille touched the screen beside her. Charts shifted, and words appeared in bold. The Blackwell standards. The room stilled. She laid out the framework piece by piece. Zero tolerance for harassment, not just as a statement, but with enforceable penalties. Executive compensation tied to diversity and equity goals. Transparent reporting structures accessible to every employee. External audits with real authority, not ceremonial committees. And most radical of all, preferential partnerships only with companies who signed on to these principles. "This will disqualify half of Silicon Valley," one board member said flatly. "Then let them disqualify themselves," Camille replied. "Our technology gives us leverage. They need us. And if they want access to what we've built, they'll have to meet the standards we set." Silence followed, heavy with both risk and possibility. Then the chair of the board spoke, his voice steady. "We back you." One by one, heads nodded around the table. The decision was unanimous. By the following week, the announcement hit the press. Camille stood at a podium, not at a glittering summit, but in Quantum Horizons' own headquarters, flanked by her employees. No theatrics, no champagne, just conviction. "Innovation without ethics is corrosion," she told the assembled journalists. "From this day forward, partnerships with Quantum Horizons require adherence to the Blackwell standards. Companies unwilling to commit to these principles are free to continue as they are, but they will do so without our collaboration, without our technology, and without our endorsement." The reaction was electric. Some reporters scribbled furiously. Others raised eyebrows at the audacity. Within hours, headlines screamed across every outlet. The Blackwell standards challenged Silicon Valley's culture. Tech giant demands ethics as cost of partnership. A new era or corporate suicide? Inside competing firms, boardrooms erupted. Executives who had once dismissed Camille as a naive upstart now sat in tense circles, debating whether to comply. "If we refuse, we lose access to their patents," one argued. If we accept, we invite lawsuits from employees the moment something goes wrong. Another countered. Fear and greed collided in real time. But outside those rooms, the public was watching. Employees across the industry began circulating petitions, demanding their companies sign on. Whistleblowers found courage, pointing to quantum horizons as proof that accountability was possible. University graduates, the next generation of talent, posted openly on forums and LinkedIn. I won't work for a company that refuses the Blackwell standards. Within 2 weeks, 3 mid-sized firms signed the agreement. Then a larger domino fell. Argus Technologies, a longtime rival of Whitmore, announced its commitment in a press release that included direct language about rebuilding trust. Their CEO, a seasoned leader with gray at his temples, admitted candidly, "We've made mistakes. We can't change the past, but we can commit to a better future. The Blackwell standards give us a path." The floodgates opened. Each signature Camille secured made it harder for others to resist. Analysts noted the pattern. Companies aligning with the standards saw stock bumps, while those resisting faced questions from investors. At the same time, Jeffrey Whitmore's shadow still lingered. Though stripped of his title, he refused to disappear. He made appearances on sympathetic financial networks, painting Camille as reckless, driven by personal vendetta. "This isn't about ethics," he declared. "It's about control. Johnson wants to crown herself Queen of Silicon Valley." His words sounded hollow, but his remaining allies amplified them in whispers across dinner tables and golf courses. Camille refused to engage publicly. "Let him talk," she told her team. "The more he shouts, the more desperate he looks. We will speak only with results." And results came. Quantum Horizons unveiled 3 new partnerships worth $11 billion combined, dwarfing the collapsed merger. Their stock soared to an all-time high. Analysts who once questioned her judgment now praised her strategy with almost reverential awe. Blackwell's chess game, one article called it, dissecting her methodical dismantling of Whitmore's power and her simultaneous construction of something larger. But the standards were not without resistance. At a private industry roundtable in Palo Alto, Camille found herself face-to-face with CEOs who bristled at the notion of enforced morality. One, a man with a reputation for brilliance and volatility, leaned across the table. "Do you really expect us to let outsiders audit our companies? To tie compensation to quotas?" Camille met his stare without flinching. "I expect you to decide what kind of future you want your company to have. Toxic leadership is no longer just a moral issue. It's a financial liability. Ask Jeffrey Whitmore if you doubt that." The room fell silent. The man leaned back, unable to conjure a reply. The shadow of Whitmore's downfall loomed too large to ignore. As weeks turned into months, the ripple effect spread beyond the tech sector. Venture capital firms began adding Whitmore clauses to their term sheets, explicit provisions against harassment and discrimination with severe financial penalties. Business schools updated curricula, using the merger collapse as a case study. Lawmakers in Washington invited Camille to testify, her voice carrying weight as both a prosecutor and a CEO. "Markets respond to risk," she told them under oath. "Make toxic behavior expensive, and companies will prevent it before it happens." Her words reverberated through the marble halls of Congress. Bipartisan applause followed a rarity in that chamber. Meanwhile, inside Quantum Horizons, life continued with a quiet steadiness. Employees worked late into the night, driven not by fear but by belief in the mission. In the cafeteria, engineers from different departments shared ideas freely. In the labs, scientists tested prototypes that promised breakthroughs in neurology. And in the quiet of her office, Camille sometimes paused at the window, looking down at the city that once doubted her, reflecting on the strange symmetry of it all. She had spent years prosecuting fraudsters who believed they were untouchable. She had left government because she thought change was too slow. Now she realized she had never left the fight. She had only shifted battlefields. Yet even as the industry bent toward her standards, Camille knew the story was unfinished. Culture does not transform overnight. For every company that signed, another hesitated, calculating whether silence was cheaper than change. For every board that embraced transparency, another plotted quietly to undermine it. But something irreversible had begun. Employees across the sector had seen that power could shift. Investors had seen that arrogance carried financial cost. Students about to graduate had seen the difference between performative slogans and enforceable action. One evening, after a long day of negotiations, Camille walked through the nearly empty halls of her headquarters. She paused outside a glass-walled room where young engineers huddled around a whiteboard, sketching out a neural interface that could restore lost speech to stroke patients. Their voices carried down the corridor, excited, hopeful, unguarded. They didn't see her watching. She smiled faintly. This was why it mattered. Not for the headlines, not for the billions, not even for the satisfaction of watching Jeffrey Whitmore fall, but for the possibility of creating an industry where these voices, bright, diverse, unafraid, could work without fear of humiliation or silence. Outside, the city lights burned. Somewhere in the shadows, Whitmore plotted his next move, his pride too jagged to surrender completely. But inside these walls, a new standard had taken root. And like all seeds planted in the right soil, it was already beginning to grow. A year had passed since the day the tech summit erupted into chaos. For most of Silicon Valley, Jeffrey Whitmore had already become a cautionary tale. A name invoked in boardrooms like a curse. Don't get Whitmored. The empire he once commanded now belonged to others. Restructured, sanitized, transformed. Business schools dissected his fall as if it were a textbook. Headlines had moved on. Investors chased new darlings. Yet in the quiet corners of the city, his shadow still lingered. Camille Johnson rarely thought of him anymore. Her days overflowed with work that mattered more. Quantum Horizons neural interface entering clinical trials, partnerships expanding to Europe and Asia, the Blackwell standards taking root across industries beyond tech. In Washington, lobbyists scrambled to align with her proposals. Universities began adopting her framework in their business ethics programs. She had become a symbol not just of success, but of possibility, proof that markets could be bent toward accountability. But on a gray February morning, her assistant entered her office holding a single envelope with raised brows. "From him," she said softly. Camille took the envelope, studied the handwriting on the front. Unsteady, rushed, almost unfamiliar. Inside, a single page, scrawled in black ink. No lawyers, no press, no audience. I ask for nothing except the chance to speak. One meeting, 1 hour, a calf of your choosing. Jeffrey. She sat back in her chair, expression unreadable. For long minutes she said nothing, only turning the page over once, then again. Finally, she folded it neatly and placed it on her desk. Tell him I'll meet him. Quietly. The calf she chose was far from the glass towers of Silicon Valley, tucked into a quiet neighborhood where baristas still knew their customers' names. She arrived precisely on time, her navy coat buttoned against the winter chill, her stride as deliberate as ever. Jeffrey was already there, sitting at a corner table. The sight of him startled her more than she expected. The arrogance had drained from his posture. His designer suit was gone, replaced by a plain sweater and worn blazer. His hair, once slicked back meticulously, now showed streaks of gray untamed. When he stood, his movements carried the weight of a man older than his years. Camille, he said quietly, thank you for coming. She sat across from him without offering her hand. What can I do for you, Jeffrey? For a moment he looked down, tracing the rim of his untouched coffee cup. I've spent a year in therapy, he said finally. The kind of work I never thought I'd need. And I see now the patterns I refused to acknowledge. I was blind, arrogant, cruel, to you, to others. I'm not asking for forgiveness or redemption. I know I don't deserve it, but I needed to say it to you. Camille studied him, her expression composed. She had faced predators in courtrooms, CEOs who lied without blinking, men who believed remorse was weakness. What sat across from her now was different, a man hollowed out by consequence, stripped of his armor. You were right, he continued after a pause. His voice trembled, though he tried to steady it. It was never about your capabilities. It was my own insecurity. I couldn't see past my outdated beliefs, and when you stood your ground, I lashed out like a child afraid of being exposed. Recognition was the first step, she thought, but she didn't voice it. She leaned back slightly. What comes next for you? He exhaled, looking out the window at the rain streaking down the glass. I've been working with an ethics professor, developing a program for executives like me, men who never saw the blind spots that destroyed them. No publicity, no redemption tour, just quiet work to stop others before they cause the same harm. She tilted her head, measuring his words. That could be valuable if approached with humility, but credibility doesn't come from saying the right things. Jeffrey, it comes from acknowledging harm, making amends, and proving change over time. He nodded slowly, his fingers tightening on the coffee cup. I've learned humility the hard way. My question is, would such a program have any credibility coming from me? She let the silence stretch before answering. Time will tell. The world doesn't need your speeches. It needs your actions. If you're committed to that, then perhaps you'll matter again, not as a titan, but as a caution that became a teacher. He met her gaze for the first time fully. There was no smirk, no sneer, only tired eyes that carried both shame and fragile hope. Thank you, he said simply. They parted without a handshake. Not friends, not allies, but no longer enemies. Each recognized the other's humanity in a way their corporate war had never allowed. Back at Quantum Horizons, Camille walked the halls quietly, pausing outside labs where her engineers huddled over glowing screens and complex diagrams. She listened to their laughter, their arguments, their excitement. It struck her that none of them would ever know how close the company had come to being absorbed, erased, rewritten under Whitmore's name. They only knew they had work that mattered, in a culture that protected them. Months later, the Blackwell standards had become industry baseline. Compliance audits were routine. Venture capital firms rewrote their playbooks, treating ethics as fiduciary duty. Congressional committees cited her testimony in drafting bipartisan reforms. Analysts coined new metrics. Leadership risk factored into valuations alongside revenue and patents. Companies with diverse, transparent leadership began commanding premium market prices. At the year's end, Camille stood at a podium in a packed auditorium, accepting the Innovation Leadership Award. Traditionally dominated by men, the trophy now gleamed in her hands as cameras flashed. She did not speak of triumph or victory. She spoke instead of responsibility. Power without accountability becomes corruption, she told the audience. Success without ethics becomes hollow. True leadership means building environments where every person can contribute their best work without fear. The crowd rose in standing ovation. The sound thundered, but Camille's gaze drifted for a moment to the back of the hall, where she imagined, perhaps fancifully, that Jeffrey might have been listening, quietly, anonymously. In the months that followed, Quantum Horizons' neural interface began changing lives in hospitals across 60 countries. Patients once trapped by degenerative diseases found their voices again. Parents held children they thought they had lost to silence. Each breakthrough carried the fingerprints of teams who flourished under the culture she had protected. And somewhere far from the limelight, in a modest seminar room at a university, Jeffrey Whitmore sat at a table with a dozen middle-aged executives, men whose resumes mirrored his former arrogance. He listened as they confronted their own blind spots, guided by the professor he had partnered with. He did not lead. He did not dominate. He listened. Whether it would matter in the long run was uncertain, but it was more than he had ever done before. Camille never spoke publicly about their meeting in the caf. Some chapters, she believed, belonged to silence. Not every story required a headline. Some transformations, if genuine, needed space away from the glare of performance. What the world remembered instead was the merger that never happened, the arrogance that collapsed, and the standards that rose from the rubble. Business journals called it the Blackwell effect. Students learned it as a turning point in corporate accountability. Investors cited it as proof that markets punish toxicity as swiftly as they reward innovation. Late at night, in the quiet of her office, Camille sometimes opened the file that contained the original contract, the one where Clause 12.4 had lain buried. Overlooked by Whitmore, dismissed as boilerplate, she would read the language again, marveling at its simplicity. Conduct unbecoming of leadership, the phrase that had brought down an empire. She would close the file, switch off the screen, and look out across the city lights. Somewhere out there, she knew, another leader believed themselves untouchable. Another culture was rotting in silence. But now there was precedent. There was proof. There was a framework. The industry could no longer pretend it didn't know the cost of arrogance. And as long as she held her post, as long as she drew breath, she would make sure the lesson endured. True power isn't measured by who you can humiliate, but by the lives you lift when you choose integrity. If you felt justice in this story, like and share so more people see how power shifts when arrogance collapses. For more stories where dignity triumphs and toxic power pays the price, subscribe and hit the notification bell. Every week we bring you powerful narratives of justice, redemption, and accountability. Don't miss the next chapter.